and get started. Hello and welcome everyone. Today is January 14th, 2024, and we're focused on a digital world town hall meeting. We are accompanied by a live audience and we will have some Q&A coming up here soon. We're grateful for you taking your time and providing your attention. The digital world is basically a decentralized organization that enables decentralization throughout the world. We'll talk a lot about some of the advancements and the model in general. We'll go over the last week's worth of advancements and then have general Q&A. We're grateful for those that are here in attendance as well as those moderators that are with us, both Wally and Elle. This is a private membership association. Some of the things we'll talk about may be forward-looking. Some of the things that we talk about are environments within particular parts of the world that basically when there's an element of power, there's also an element of corruption. We refer to them as secret combinations, and how they basically infiltrate different political bodies that may be public as well as some that are private, and how decentralization is actually an alternative to provide transparency to that and provide a way forward for humanity. We're working hard to try and find a nice...
meant to be sharing. It's not sharing.
Okay.
Meant to be sharing. It's not sharing.
Thank you for the heads up. I'll go ahead and do that right now. It is sharing on the other channel, but I always end up, and if it sometimes it stops here, but you let, no, you should be able to see the screen now. Is that right? Can you confirm?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So some of the things that we'll talk about is really decentralization and the fine line that it connects with government-based systems as well as the future of digital ecosystems, which we'll talk a lot about. It works by giving the individual their own private keys, so their own ability to have systems and services that tie to them as an individual and their data. So we talk about derived keys that tie to that as well, so usernames, passwords, photos, contacts, calendars, messages. It's really a parallel system that's private to the existing centralized systems, namely on the mobile devices such as Apple and Google-based systems. This last week, we're working through some advancements within the digital world per se, as far as a new website, as far as a new design that ties to 2025 goals as they relate to native going live. So this will be the first year that native, which is for some people that are not aware, there's assets that basically help enable. So for instance, within the digital world, you can deliver these types of, or offer these types of services. And the way that they're paid for is with an asset called native. And that native can also be exchanged or converted into other currencies such as the digital US dollar, the Hawaiian dollar, or other currencies which we'll talk about. And those are also referred to as similar things around stable currencies. They're usually backed by real world assets, etc. So this is one design. There'll be a couple more that this body will be able to get a choice and say, hey, we like this or we don't like this. But this is one that's basically coming out. Some of the other things that happened this last week, we were able to attend Consumer Technology Association trade show, which is the largest trade show, at least that I'm aware of in the world. This actually was done in 12 different locations, 4 different conference centers, and it's massive. It's so big that every single night your feet feel like they're going to just fall off. But we're grateful for the folks that came from around the world to be able to participate in this. It was very eye-opening to see some of the different countries that usually haven't had representations that had massive representations at it. So that was a lot of advancements. We'll talk about some of the advancements there. One of the other things that is big this last week is focusing on what's called the Certified D Corporation. And what this is a digital corporation that will basically help enable the industry, as well as, it's usually there's certain things that you need to have recognize these types of organizations, such as governmental entities, as well as the banking ecosystems. And so there's a push to be able to help make that become a simple reality around this Certified D Corporation, which we'll also discuss. This last week or last couple weeks, there's been a start on the Canadian country. There's needs to be more unity, or at least more volume of folks, which there's some key folks that are on this, a couple of them are on this call, at least one of them, but really what we're hopeful for is to be able to align in a very material way as the inauguration, as this week goes on. By the way, it'll be on the 14th. It'll happen on the 20th, which is 6 days away. So by the time this meeting happens next week, the inauguration would have been completed. And we're grateful for those who are extending invitations and tickets to be able to attend. But there's a lot of conversations around really America, and whether that includes Canada, whether that includes Mexico, whether that includes Greenland, or even all the way down to the Panama Canal. But Canada is a very key and important topic, and the technology that the digital world has enabled, I believe, that can actually help to have this conversation become very real in a very material way. So we hope it's not time to go live with this by any means, but the development side of it has actually started. And it's going to be a different approach where it's really focused on some of the outcomes or use cases that can actually be realized by it. So that is another topic this last week. The other thing, in addition to so we've already had a lot of these documents that have basically been up for review and going through a process, but there's one that's been added this last week, which is called the Digital World Communication Protection Act, which talks about the right of privacy and the right to transact and the right to travel. So the combination of all of those different elements, you can find it in the same link that's been provided historically. It's in the same structured document area. For those that don't have it, I'll go ahead and drop it in here now. And you can do it now, we can discuss things now, or we can do it at another time as well. I'll go ahead and, so that's all of the documents, and then this new one that was added, I'll go ahead and drop that in here as well. So any kind of feedback or thoughts, it doesn't have to be today, but that's another key topic that is important to mention as well as it relates to the digital world. As far as one of the service providers for the digital world, there's been a new site with some new products that have gone up, which are related to ClearOS, namely ClearOS Server, which breaks into a community edition that's free, a home edition, and then a business edition. So they've been around for a long time. I'll run you through that website and some of the advancements. It'll continue to be matured over time as well. Where's it at? I don't have it up. So we'll go ahead. It's just clearos.com. And there's actually there's two really good videos that are also included in here. And it goes over kind of what is it not sharing again? Let me go ahead and do that. So you guys you're not even seeing it this whole time. That's okay. So this is what I was showing. This ClearOS site that is a product of ClearCenter that runs the server backend, also has a desktop version as well as a mobile version. This is actually what comes on.
Not seeing it.
It must be something on your side. Can others confirm that you're seeing my screen or not? Can anybody?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, must be something on your side, Danielle.
Okay.
But if you still can't, log out, log back in, or try and, let me know if that continues, because you really,
I'll leave it on back.
yeah, these things are really important to try and to visualize. So ClearOS Mobile, ClearOS Desktop, as well as the server editions, and there's 3 different editions, have all gone live in a new ecosystem on ClearOS.com. There's some continuing kind of perfecting that's happening. There's actually a really cool video here. Maybe I'll go through it just for name's sake at the end of the meeting, but wonderful stuff. So for those of you that are not aware, one of the core competencies of the Clear companies is building an operating system with a marketplace attached to it that then basically can enable future systems. We're going to talk a little bit about that because that's a part of what we're doing within the 2025 year as it relates to what we call a fund, or the overall vision, if you will. So historically, there were organizations such as these from 2009 until 2024, and then 2025 to 2026. There's ecosystems that will basically tie to operating systems with a marketplace attached to it, which we'll talk a little bit about in the future as well. So those are some of the updates. As far as other crazy things that have happened this last week, the things that we've seen are really just continuation of what we've seen historically. And I know that fire's been around as long as we've been around, but and I'm not in the middle of all of these, but I can tell you that when I went through the fires personally on Maui, they weren't like other fires. And it would be sad that humanity is actually hurting others intentionally, or maybe for greed, or maybe for budgets, or maybe for rebuild, or maybe for control. I would hope that humanity would not be doing that, and that we care about life in a more respectful way. But getting a lot of feedback from someone that's not muted, if that's okay, that would be great. So that's basically, those are the topics, those are the updates. It's been a full week, primarily because of the CES event. It was a good event, a lot of folks, a lot of attendees. And interesting, there's some interesting security measures that we kind of live with now as a humanity. But other than that, any thoughts or topics or questions or other things that you're seeing in the world this last week, or areas you want to dive into topics on?
I have a question, Michael.
Yeah.
I've been talking, to a few people about decentralization, and a lot of people are saying, yeah, well, that's on the blockchain, that's on the blockchain, that's on the blockchain. But from what I understand, just because it's on the blockchain, does that mean that it's decentralized?
That's a really good question. And I think us as humans, we use words and vocabularies, and some of the marketing folks will spin things, and it's just natural. You see an evolution of it. But I think the word decentralization is a true and correct principle that goes on in perpetuity for lots of things. The universe, our lives, our bodies, all these different elements. There's intelligence inside of it and how it works. But inside of what we call decentralization in the digital world encompasses what you're calling, or they're calling, on-chain. So chain is basically an application that sits on a server that does consensus that things happened in unison at a certain time and date, and maybe with certain what we call cryptography, which is just a public address and a private address or key, heterographic key. And it's only one portion. And to be honest with you, it's not even the biggest portion. The identity side of it with the cryptographic keys and the authentication side of it is just as important to decentralization as what the world calls blockchain. And so it's not, and some people refer to it as crypto or cryptography. And it's really an intelligent organization of all of these different facets that enable decentralization, and ultimately what we're calling the digital world, where we can all connect, but how do we govern? How do we govern ourselves? How do we own our identity? How do we own our data? How do we come up with standards? And the standards are very, very important. And you'll find in time that all of this stuff basically comes together to create the digital world. So how do we connect? How do we get online? How do we authenticate? How do we transact? And how do others actually accept certain things as truth? So if a transaction happened and it happened on what you're calling, or they're calling, a blockchain, what chain? What's the validation? What's the acceptance? Who, and that's a lot of the things that I think will start happening here in this next week, where we get new administration that's not just sitting on their hands and causing issues when it comes to adopting innovation and technology, because that's really what we're talking about. And it will be the innovation and technology that is easy to understand and easy to use and actually really works. And some of the base things to work is it's got to be real time. It's got to be totally transparent. It has to have forms of openness and lack of centralized control. And that's where a lot of these systems, they just fall down, where there's actually centralized control. I would say, I brought this up in a meeting yesterday with a bunch of funding folks. And I said 95% of the crypto world either doesn't understand true decentralization, or they're trying to centralize decentralization. And this guy says, no, it's like 98%. And, as I went through some of these different events like Consensus and others, and we actually started over the last couple of years, we've actually started keeping a calculation of what, is that centralized? Is that centralized decentralization? Is that decentralized? And then there's another element to it, which is around distributed. And it's really crazy to see how many people don't really understand. They think about things, for instance, there's a large project that we're working with, And they start with authenticating off of Google or Facebook. And you can literally set up an account off of these other ones. I said, first off, you're not even starting with the fundamentals of, it's what we call permissionless. So you shouldn't have to get permission from anybody to exist. Now, like for instance, I could also disagree with that comment and say, no business has the right to exist unless they provide some form of value and some form of adoption. And then on the flip side, to say, okay, well, an organization is different than an individual. An individual has a right to exist and does not need to get permission to do certain things. So for instance, do we really need to register or get permits or get, you know, certain certificates or certifications from other bodies? And if we do, why? What are those bodies doing that is so special that we need to ask permission to do it? And I believe that there is I think this will become very, very real in 2025. Artificial intelligence, if we continue to have learning models that are responsible and distributed or even decentralized, I believe that with that type of a system, it will bring maturity to the existing centralized systems at a level that no centralized system will be able to compete with. And when you layer artificial intelligence over a permissionless environment where the individual can actually govern themselves, I think that people are going to start understanding the power of what the digital world and others could actually realize for humanity. For instance, an example would be, let's say there's a dispute between party A and party B. Party A could say, I'm going to just rant. I'm going to say all these things that this person did to me or this organization did to me, type it out or talk it out. And the next thing you know is the AI can come back and say, well, you know, did this happen? Or think about, because right now we're working with AI where we're just asking it questions and it's giving us data. But what happens when AI can actually use inductive or deductive reasoning and then ask questions back based upon all the heuristics and data that they have? And the next thing you know, it can come back and say, well, did you consider this, or did you do this, or were you guilty of this? And then if they're like, well, maybe yes or no, because remember, this is a neutral ground. This is just communicating with tech. And then once they go through this process, they file their claim, whether public or private, and then the other party can then have their response to it. And I really believe that, kind of like a sales funnel or a court funnel, I really believe that over 80% of all these disputes can actually be resolved by just enabled communication with a third party that is absolutely neutral. That's why we have juries. That's why we have jury selection. That's why we have jurisdictions. And right now, no one is really choosing to be a part of a certain jurisdiction. When you go through a dispute or a court process, that jurisdiction is a very key topic to how things can actually be addressed or resolved. And you have to set up a precedence to say, hey, this is the jurisdiction for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. And if we all select or elect to be a part of a digital jurisdiction, and we know what for instance, like these documents here, like you can literally have governing docs that say certain things that basically drop into certain areas that is a certain belief, if you will. So this is just a simple, and the goal is to keep them all very easy to understand, easy to communicate. And then what's neat is artificial intelligence can also learn from these governing docs and, you know, basically create that type of an ecosystem. So the other things are simple services like a marriage certificate. For instance, here in Utah, we've delivered close to 40,000 online cryptographic marriages worldwide. And initially it was, how could that be valid? To let's create a legal case against it, to other jurisdictions like Israel and others that questioned it, to their own court saying, yes, it is valid. And, you know, it needs to be adhered to, so to speak. So you'll start seeing physical centralized systems start understanding, and you can even build parallel systems. Like earlier today, I was talking with some legal folks as well as some security folks, talking about why can't the digital world adopt the same Jobs Act that the United States of America adopted and offer a Reg A and a Reg D process for companies that actually want to raise funds. and do it in an automated way at scale. So you standardize the process. Yeah, you standardize the process and then you duplicate it over and over. And you could even, you could operate in a different jurisdiction legally, you could operate within a different currency, you could operate in different ownerships, but you also try and build a parallel system to existing centralized systems until the recognition is there. And that's one of the reasons we hold these meetings every week. That's one of the reasons why there's just this continual development and updates. And everyone should be able to tune in and have a voice and be able to ask questions and then get responses. And through asking questions and get responses, I believe these systems can actually start, it's kind of like AI. The way that it learns is from people asking it questions and then it goes out. Because I believe more than half the battle in life is learning what questions to ask. And then where to ask. And then actually, once you have the answer, what you internalize and do with that. So as far as the core of your question, on chain, you have to say, well, what chain is it? So for instance, if we jump into some of the statistics, and I'll see if I can find a real quick slide. So this is an example of a couple different chains as well as a Visa. So you've got Bitcoin, which is a chain. And the reason they call them chains is because they build blocks and then they tie together. The average block building time for Bitcoin is 10 minutes. The average block building time for Ethereum is actually 2 minutes unless you pay gas and some of the future stuff that they've done. But those are actually, when people talk about chain, that's actually what it is. And then, Visa, which is not a chain and it's not permissionless. Both Bitcoin and Ethereum are permissionless if they're not centralized. And then the digital world, same type of thing. But the difference is you got proof of life and less than 3 to 5 seconds, somewhere in there, and really no cost within the digital world compared to Visa, which is not even in the same universe. It's a centralized system that's very expensive, 2.4% of all transactions. Average daily transactions about 14 billion. So they're charging about $336 million in US equivalent dollars per day. And then you've got Ethereum, that's 26 million for the same type of structure. And people can actually say, I'll let it take longer and pay less fees. So that is an option. But ultimately, I believe the ante into the game will be standards that are real time with no fees. And this is just the validator side of it that says a transaction happened and then multiple nodes saw it. But how did people actually authenticate, and how do people actually identify, and how do people actually start interacting with these ecosystems is a whole nother story. So for instance, let's say if the Mexican country, someone wanted to do certain things in there, the way to be able to enter into any of these types of systems has to go through an actual login or authentication process, kind of like what you see here. So I'm actually using 5-factor authentication, and all of those 5 factors are something that I own as an individual to log into an environment to be able to actually, do certain things. So this is an illustration, but you can't do everything that I just did right now. You can't register a car, you can't register a business, you can't create a dispute, you can't vote, you can't do any of that stuff with just being on chain. The authentication side of it and the individual's identity, especially when it comes to derived keys, is absolutely imperative for the future. And we have a gentleman that's on the call today, Richard Dick, who actually helped to come up with parts and pieces of that model. And it wasn't cryptography, but it was how it was actually applied. And I would say many, many years ago, he was actually very influential in not just what happened with HIPAA, Health Information Portability and Privacy Act, but the policy that was behind it and the original intent. And as he watched it get rolled out through his lifetime, he sees, hey, it rolled out the absolute opposite of what it should have done. It should have actually let the individual basically own their own identity and data. So I don't know if he's listening, but if he's got any feedback on that, he's welcome to pop in. But this is basically what it does. And this is actually how it's being applied to Ethiopia. So Richard, is there anything you want to bring up on that particular topic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It hasn't been what we actually intended.
Yeah. But you can see how that same type of system, not with on-chain like Danielle is talking about, but how authentication and the individual's identity from a permissionless system can actually put the individual in the middle of these systems, whether they're banks, taxes, social platforms, phone records, call records, pharmaceutical records, credit cards, any other kind of source data provider, which is a term that Richard actually taught me over the years. We've worked together probably for 20 years now, something like that. So 2005, I think, was when we met, around there.
Yep.
So really one of the most influential men when it comes to identity, when it comes to what he taught me around what's called the Maria Gonzalez problem, where what do you do when you have 24 little babies that are born in the same hospital on the same day, and how do you actually go through a life of helping them to be an individual that's independent and not just tracked by centralized systems, but can actually be free, but they still have the same birth date and name of someone else. So anything else you want to add to that, Richard? No?
No, we solved what I call the Maria Gonzalez problem. Is we discovered more than 10,000 Maria Gonzalez's just in the LA basin.
More than 10,000. Wow. Why is that, do you think? Is that just a popular name?
That's a very popular name in the Hispanic community, but essentially you can ill afford to get the wrong one if you're going to release sensitive personal information out of a health record, for example.
Yeah. So 24 in one day, over 10,000 you've identified in one county or region. And that's a perfect example of, the naming conventions that we've had, or social security number conventions that we've had, or even credit card or payment conventions. They're all flawed. And that's why, I think your original question, Danielle, is valid and important around, it's on chain. Well, yeah, so you have a consensus between transactions or something that actually happened and multiple third parties can validate it. So you can have a trustless environment between multiple sources that haven't verified or validated one another. But it goes so much bigger than just on-chain and transactions. It has to start with identity. And that's what Richard Dick really has dedicated his life to solving. Not only that, but he understands the legal process. He understands how can you take, let's say pharmaceutical records, or x-rays or anything, and give it back to the individual. Well, it's the individuals in the first place. And if they say they want it back, Richard's one that has actually helped through insurance organizations and multiple other agencies, basically enable that user to click a button and say, I request my data back. And through a simple request, and that's what it comes down to, is all of us as humans, and I would say there's even more moving parts to that, but we can self-select to have our own data. Our identity is our identity. We are private. We can be private. It's a right at birth, I believe. And I think as time goes on, for convenience and for what they call being safe. So for me, I really struggle with that word safe, because I feel like every time it's used, rights have been stripped. And so, make a long story short, I personally am very grateful to know Richard, to just experience and learn from him over the years. He's not just a good example, but he's a good human being. And I believe that some of the work that he has done and will continue to do through the efforts of the digital world, I think he's already got stuff that's already been in the Smithsonian, which is crazy because he's still alive. But I think there'll be a lot more. And so thank you, Richard, for not just always showing up, but always being there and being that consistent rock. So, by the way, that reminds me, Elle, if you could task me tomorrow with a Clear Foundation topic, that would be great. So, anything else you want to mention, Richard, before we move on to just open questions?
No, That's good. Thank
I
you.
hope you get feeling better soon. Much love and welcome to New Year. I know there's a lot of folks that are sick. I actually went through probably my own 10 days worth of sickness, or more. But anyways, any other comments or thoughts? Charles,
So
welcome,
I
welcome.
just have one question, Michael.
Go ahead, Becca.
So going back to, I think it's called DAC, like a decentralized autonomous corporation that you showed on the screen there.
Mhm.
Would that be something in terms of like a hybrid consortium chain?
Are you talking about what
Is-
are you talking about what I'm showing here? Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would it's a category of a business type that is originated within the digital world that we believe a form of certification can be put behind and scaled. Kind of like, you had original, just general, they used to call them businesses, and then they came up with LLCs or LLPs or SPVs or SPEs. And in between there, you had S Corps and C Corps. So, you had an S or you had a C, and then they came up with B for, a benefit type organization. And there's different legislations that different states have to actually adopt to be able to do these. And we believe that what the digital world has done already creates a category for digital organizations to be created. Now, an organization is not just a business, but it could be a trust, it could be multiple things. But being digital creates a category that I believe is just as disruptive as the LLC was to incorporations, or the B corporation was, or the C Corp. So C Corp is focused for shareholders. S Corp is focused for individuals, especially around taxation and benefits. And then different states adopt them. And this basically helps to stand up if there's multiple different states. So for instance, if I drop down and let's go to Mexico and let's say we want to create a business, and let's go ahead and just pick one of these organizations. So decentralized autonomous organization, one, or a digital LLC, et cetera. But when you go through and create it, the ability to actually scan and then validate one's identity or process of five-factor authentication, I believe that in and of itself creates a scalable business category process that then can be tied to other regions. Now, most of these are in the Pacific region, but you can see how, this unique derived key, which can enable an individual to actually validate, or a group of individuals. So you can do a thing called multi-signing or multi-signatures, where I might be the only one that created it here, but after it's created, we can actually go in and actually add members to it. So let's say that this particular organization, you want to add more members to it, they can basically scan and then they become a part of it. So you can see that there's a manager here, and this is actually a public address. So if we dig into this, you can actually see, so this is a public listing, right? So we come into this member environment here, and nobody really knows who this individual is, but people can request to actually know who they are or get validation. So, this entity, there's a private side to things. So as this private system gets maturity and adoption throughout the world, I believe that the understanding and importance of what's called a D corporation will become much more important. There's also a lot of validity and validation that comes from certifications. And so, for instance, if a B Corp wants to be certified, there's a lot of accounting firms like Ernst & Young or Deloitte & Touche or PricewaterhouseCoopers around the world that have processes that people can jump through and go through validation. Now, the goal with a digital business or organization or corporation or trust is to have the opposite of all of the compliance craziness that's out there in the world. For instance, if you create a B corporation and you go through one of the certification partners or you do it on your own, every year you actually have to file certain documents to state that you're a B corporation. Now, does that give you tax advantages? Not really. Does that give you any kind of special treatment? Not really. Does it tie to the craziness around global warming and certain Measurements, yeah, it's directly tied to the games associated with what the world would call, the new types of World Economic Forum measurements and individual, scores and all of the craziness that goes along with that. The D corporations or organizations is a direct countermeasure to what the B corporation was doing with that. So, but we're using technology to automate it. So for instance, what if you didn't actually have to go and do XYZ every year, other than maybe clicking a button or scanning something? What if you could go through and actually validate transactions or do filings or reports with just a click of a button, and it's all automated? Because that is one of the things that intelligently organized technology can actually do for the future of humanity. And what's crazy is I see so many people giving up their rights when they go to an airport and they want to just speed through the line instead of saying, well, I'll stand in this long line, or I'll go ahead and say I want to opt out of you taking this photo, or I want to opt out of going through that machine. The convenience side of things that humanity is so willing to give up is what is actually leading them to the centralized enslavement. And they don't even see it. It's like the froggy in the water. But I know I'm just rambling on, but the net is the D corporation certification, I believe, helps to create a long-term viable offering. For instance, in the technology industry, around validating someone's professional prowess, do they join a private membership association so that they can actually say, hey, I am a doctor, or I am an attorney, or and that's all they're doing. The bar association, the medical association, these are just private membership associations that go through some form of certification that says, hey, you're now a part of it. And then they have some type of grievance process that people can say, hey, there's an issue with this individual and what they're doing or how they're acting, that then ties to these different private membership associations. And these associations bind, whether it's per county or province or state or federally, they basically go through a process of just saying there's a validation here. So there's also positive ones. You could tie it to kids that are going through and learning productivity apps that then have games and how they come through and prove that they can do certain things. Or, there's just multiple different environments. For instance, the A+ certification for the technologist back in the day from what was that name of that company? Not Certiport, but they're wonderful too. They were out of, I want to say Chicago. Anyways, the certification framework is just something that really can solidify a business that others can trust. Because right now, banks don't know what a D corporation is. Governments don't understand it, but they will. So,
because the blockchain, like the system, the software, it just slips through the back door.
Yeah.
The only reason why I was able to pitch the innovation for the hybrid chain is because it just slipped through the back door in our finance department, and I kind of just picked it up and run with it. But you don't see it. It's just kind of sitting there waiting for someone to pick up and run with it, I think. Because I'm using the authentication for that chain that I pitched on. I'm using it to log into to identify myself.
At work?
So I'm using I'm using it, yeah. This is how we log into our system. This is how I log in anyway, through the authentication app through Microsoft. So is the authentication app through Microsoft, is that? I know on the chain because I know the tokens.
That's one of the things whenever you look at, and when we talk about certifications, when you dig into it, you look at who owns the actual master private key for the original key. So who owns the actual keys? Most centralized or permission chains or authentication systems won't actually have derived keys. And like, I'll bet you
Yeah.
your system doesn't have derived keys, but the original key that you log in
No,
with.
this is why I'm literally here every week, like, because I know that this is what people need at the front end.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
And-
I do believe that organizations and corporations should take the initiative to look after their businesses the right way and manage their businesses the way that they should, so they can operate correctly. But I do believe in freedom and sovereignty at the same time, as a, you know, separating work life from personal life is important.
Yeah. And you know, what's
Yeah.
interesting is who owns those Microsoft keys, the original ones, because like when you get an ID in the United States of America, and we call it a real ID, those are actually using encryption keys, just like what you're doing when you log in. So they just scan it at the waypoints or the airports. And when you dig into who actually own those, you have to figure out who owns the top one, because they can actually unravel all of the data underneath it. So in the digital world, the individual can verify who they are. In the current centralized systems, I would even argue the Microsoft one they're using, it can actually be determined based upon the holders of the data. And Microsoft in particular, actually the chief legal counsel wrote a book called Tools and
Oh
Web.
yes, I read that.
Did
I
you?
read that one.
You actually read it?
Yes, I read
Really?
it.
Well, wow.
I did, yes.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
funny that you guys are actually running that, and that's what you actually. So this guy here, he was the chief legal counsel for Microsoft. Now he's actually the president, and supposedly this was forwarded by Bill Gates. But inside of here, they actually explain so much around how these encryption keys are used. They explain how open source the battle was lost, namely with some of the work that was done in New Zealand. They explain how certain types of FASB requests or federal requests to certain technology or financial entities, you know, whether it's Google or Facebook or Microsoft or even like LinkedIn or crazy stuff like banks, how the governments can actually request data and the individual doesn't know that the data is being requested, but they have a responsibility to provide the data and then a gag order to not disclose it. And so when you look at that and then you layer on top of it encryption keys, for instance, like I'm even in a browser right now and I'm looking at an SSL connection. This says that it's secure. This also runs on an actual chain. So you've got a public key. That's the key right there. I don't know if you can see this, but that's the public key. This is a certificate. This is all just encryption. But when you really dig into it, there's a bunch of different issuers. So this particular one is called DigiCert, which I actually know the guy that started this right here out of Utah. Actually, he was in the same building as I started one of my first businesses. But DigiCert basically provides SSL certs, and there's multiple other organizations that do it. But what I'm trying to drive at is, for instance, if you want to deliver a website within the country of China, the SSL cert and the issuer actually provides access to the private master key, the original one, so that anyone in the government can actually back into who actually created the keys. Because what it does is the secure socket layer, or SSL, or HTTPS in the browser basically enables their browsing to be private. But if someone has the key to it, they can actually unencrypt it. So I believe that derived keys not only is going to help the individual in the future, but it will help things like websites and validations in the future. Why is this important? What happens if an individual can spoof who they are, or a video, or anything? I mean, you look at what AI is doing. Like literally, they can full on create movies with people inside of it doing certain things, and it's not even the people. So how do you validate who those people are? This is a process to do that. How can you validate a website? For instance, what's stopping AI from going and building a business and building a website and then getting a domain, having a human validate that domain, pay for the domain, and then standing up a site? And some people may say, well, that's just crazy, Mike. It would never happen. It's already happened. Already happened today. Like literally, not just today, but as of today. So the beginning of 2025, this is already a common thing. I actually have a bud that basically put in 1 Bitcoin. So at that time it was about 65 grand, and turned it into almost 2.5 million within a short period of time, less than 3 weeks. And the actual bot figured out how to, what a good lucrative business was, and how to actually get a human to validate the verification for them. So it actually figured out how to get a payment process to actually pay a human. You know, when you have to go through a website and check a button, it actually figured out how to do all of that. And not only that, but you could say, hey, you know, build this type of a revenue stream and this type of a site, do the design, do the content, and then you build it out. How do you know that that's really valid? And that's why these types of systems with these derived keys, it's not just what Richard Dick created, you know, with basic identity principles. I think it was I2E, or I don't remember the terminology that he used, but derived keys on top of that literally provides absolute transparency, privacy, and substantiation where the individual can actually validate and verify who they are. So the credit systems, the financial systems, the reputation systems will all end up going to a model like that in the future. So other questions or thoughts? Good question there, Becca. Feedback? You guys ready for a new year?
Yes, and new brains.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you there.
Please.
Absolutely ready.
Yeah, it's
Hi, Charles.
hi Charles.
Aloha.
Aloha. Anything you want to say before we wrap up today?
Well, I want to apologize if I scared anybody with my shirtless look when I turned on the video.
Nah, I didn't see it.
We didn't say.
You got a good shirtless look. I've seen that before. It's all good. No worries.
Yeah.
No worries. Any other thoughts or feedback or comments? Maybe there you are. Beautiful. Maybe even a shout out to some of the folks in the LA area. You know, just some prayers and positive energy. I know that Charles,
And also our brothers and sisters in Tibet, Michael. I don't know if people know, but there was a very large earthquake in Tibet.
No, I wasn't aware of that. How big was it?
It was about 7.3.
Ooh, yeah, that is a big one.
And 125 people passed away, unfortunately.
Oh,
Wow. When was this?
About 6 days ago.
Wow.
never
Yeah.
even heard about it.
Absolutely blind to that one. 125 people.
That's because there's no movie stars there and there's no sports teams.
There you go.
Yeah. Well,
That's the most enlightened people in the world, but hey.
what'll be interesting is seeing how the rebuild of LA parallels with the rebuild of Lahaina and the games that were played. And I can almost just guesstimate that it's going to be something very, very similar with budgets and corporations and, you know, the rubber stamping and the byproduct being smart cities that are actually building centralized systems that we're building the alternative to. So I actually talked with the leader of what we call Clear Homes, who's in earlier today, and you know the demand for those is really growing. They've already done over 700 million in pre-orders, and you know the growth is there. The cost is exorbitant as well, but he was down there in the San Diego, LA area, and it's just very interesting because he was one that we were hopeful to be able to have some of the homes built and rebuilt in Lahaina. Which, Charles, do you want to give us an update on what's going on there? Like what real results have actually resulted? It's been over 2 years now, yeah? You're on mute. Charles, do you want to unmute? Charles, do you want to unmute and then just give us a, go ahead?
Not
No.
really,
No.
but in real results, there is 170, I forget how many now, about 174, almost 200 temporary homes. And the temporary homes are, the way, FEMA does their thing is amazing. They go through all the trouble of building temporary homes that will be basically torn apart and taken down. So again, a unique aspect of what's different between Hawaii and California is land issues. Unlike anywhere else in the United States, Hawaii has something called a unique kind of title, and about, I forget how many thousands of acres, but they have a unique kind of title called an allodial title. An allodial title is a completely different animal that most people are unaware of, and tax attorneys don't know it. They may have studied it, but they don't know it. So I'm preparing my documents to take family lands in Lahaina, and that is going to be a fun case of oh shit for somebody, because it bogs down completely the concept of, is Hawaii a state of the United States of America? And so there are some unique things that most people are not aware of about Hawaii.
Yeah, it's a whole nother topic in and of itself, and one that's very imperative and important. But do you have any thoughts as you watch the fires burn in LA and bring back any memories or empathy or?
There's empathy, and yet at the same time, there's a thought process of, you idiots, there's been great fires and burns, and the conversation about clear, I think it's called clear burning, where you clear out the underbrush and take care of that so that you don't have a tinderbox going off all the time. And that's from the 80s. So with great sadness to see such things, but at the same time, you idiots, you keep putting the same people with the same stupid answers that, so they did this in the 80s, where they had huge, monstrous fires that were going off. And again, as an old man, I remember that stuff. Not clearly, not all of the details, but Maka, you would have been in diapers, I think, at that time.
Yeah, in the 70s I was. That's exactly right. I find it interesting how, similar to Lahaina, they had no water by design. They were literally just letting the water flow through. But I don't know. I don't want to be on the conspiracy side of things. I want to be positive and uplifting, that humanity would not intentionally, by design, start a fire and then not be able to put a fire out and to have lives perish. I could care less about the possessions. The things that I care about is really how they're stripping systems, monies, and all of this out of the ecosystems, how it's paralleling some of the things that are happening with transparency and the corruption within Hollywood, and how it's affected in building within Hollywood, which is a whole nother conversation. But it'll be interesting to see if there's some parallels as to how corporations are created and how monies are sent to these corporations that don't have the same governance structure. Not that California has governance structures anyways, but they don't have the same types of governance structures that naturally tie to these types of ecosystems. So any other thoughts?
Okay, hey, Michael.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got one other thought. Maybe it's just an idea, something to think about. Who's the gentleman that has built the Claire homes?
It's Carl.
Yeah, Carl, that's it. Maybe we should think about putting emergency shelters as a service there at some point. Just an idea.
Yeah, one of the things that's hard, and Charles touched on it, is, and actually, we've got Andrew from Maui as well that just joined. It's been very interesting to see how the rebuild process, basically, they do this two-step process, and for the same price that they're basically standing up, or the provisions or time to just get the temporary stuff going up, which then gets torn down, I mean, it's just a perfect example of how government is just so inefficient, but I think it's by design, because I think the end product is a centralized system, 15-minute city that they end up wanting to build, which will actually change the culture, the community, and the vibrancy. Because many folks don't know this, but Maui, and specifically Lahaina, was actually the what would be the equivalent of Washington, D.C. in America, but for the Hawaiian Kingdom. It's actually where the original base was from. And so they're ripping out the identity and culture of the people by burning and rebuilding Lahaina. So very, very hitting close to home with what's happening in LA, and it's going to be interesting to see if it parallels. Half of me wants to just scream at the top of my lungs. The other half is like, no, just let it unfold, and sooner or later the truth will come out that these were by design, whether they came from the skies, whether they came from a match on somebody, a lighter from somebody. But I can't believe that, all the fires started in Maui the way that they started, and the way that the rebuild is going, and all the different fires in LA. And it's not just LA. This has happened in Australia. This is the same thing. When you look at when they wanted to put the commuter rail in Australia versus when they wanted to put the commuter rail in LA, the burn zones are similar. It's just like, hey, we had a plan to put a commuter rail in, do this and this from here, and that's where all the fires are. And that's the same thing that happened in Australia, that's happening and they're still burning and starting. Like there's new fires that just started yesterday, and other ones that aren't even put out in LA. It's still on fire. And then in Paradise up in California, even before the Maui fires. And when you look at who the leaders are from those fires that are over in Maui, it's all the same stuff. Andrew, welcome, weigh in and provide some feedback. Got to unmute it first though. Andrew, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, buddy.
Provide some guidance and feedback, because you've lived in the middle of all this. Tell us what you're thinking or feeling.
Well, I was actually in Thailand at the time with Momo. I've got to say hi to her, guys. I've got her watching the meeting remotely. She's in Texas right now.
Hi, Momo.
You can just see me. There's Momo.
Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Hello. Aloha.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, we were in Thailand at the time when the fires went down, but it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest when I heard about these missing children. And I came back and I started interviewing people on the street. And so many people had said that there are missing children, there are parents, there are whole families that just were gone that day. And the mainstream media is telling a different story. The governor is telling a different story. And I personally know someone who owns one of the fishing vessels that was out there that day that night picking up the dead bodies. And they alone had well over 100, it sounded like. So, and they're scared to come forward. And the people that I've talked to here are very afraid to come forward. Some of them said that they have even been threatened. So there's definitely something else going on here. And I mean, the melted glass, I don't know how deep down the rabbit hole of physics and science everybody here has gone, but it's not a wildfire. You look in the dictionary for the definition of wildfire, it's in the wilderness. It's not a city fire. They're using neuro-linguistic programming, wordplay, to avoid paying out the insurance. And with all of the data and evidence that I've gathered here, it really looks to me that the state of Hawaii is trying to move forward with rolling out the digital smart cities, what I call them slave cities, the 15-minute cities. So yeah, I mean, I could talk all day on that stuff, so I don't want to take up more of the time, but thank you for welcoming me here.
It's good to have you, and it's good to see you, and thank you for standing up for truth and creating a spotlight in the right areas at the right time with some wisdom as well. So it'll be interesting to just watch it roll out. One of the things that I see is there's funding vehicles through RITs and other things that are easy to get funding that basically pay dividends to the holders, but they do it in such a way where the tenants or the people that are actually living in them can only get underwritten or approved with certain types of conditions that tie to the centralized systems. So that's one of the ways that they basically will take over these communities within Lahaina. And I know the Hawaiian people's heart are stronger than anything I've really met as far as a culture. And they're not just going to sit by and let that happen, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens within, LA versus what's happened there in Maui. What's interesting is Maui a couple months before changed a bunch of the laws versus LA or California a couple months before. It wasn't necessarily laws, whereas it was insurance. A lot of the insurance carriers just straight drop people before, which tells me, hey, the heuristics and data were there. They know this was coming. So why would they let all of the tanks just run the water through into the ocean? Why would they not take, when you back up, even when Trump was originally in office, he was like, hey, we're willing to send water from northern states, whether it's Oregon or Washington or Canada, through the aqueducts. They had all the aqueduct systems. I used to live in LA. I lived there for 6 years before I basically was emancipated from the state of California and then moved to Utah when I was in my teenage years. And the inefficiencies by design, you have to scratch your head, but I'm looking for, I shouldn't say I'm looking forward, but it's going to be interesting to see what kind of budgets are approved over the next 6 days from the federal administration, namely the Biden ecosystem, for California/LA, and then how LA County actually operates to use some of the funds or create some of the funds to do the rebuild, and how we can see the parallel of what's happening in Maui. Because where you're at, and you know this probably better than I do, but a lot of, whether you're talking the sheriffs or the planners and the county commissioners, all of these folks are the folks that were the same sheriffs that were in the Paradise Fires in California. They're the same leaders, the same people, and then they're just replaying it in other environments, thinking that no one's paying attention. But again, this is a digital world ecosystem that we're talking about the future in a positive way, and how technology can free us and create an unslave environment versus what's happening with really these centralized controls that are creating the slave environments. I think it's interesting you call them slave cities instead of 15-minute cities. But any other thoughts or last words before we wrap up today from anyone, or thoughts or comments?
Michael, are the Clear homes, are they, what's the word I'm trying to find?
They're fireproof, they are termite proof, and they're cyclone proof.
Okay, and are they are they connected to critical infrastructure at any point? Like, do we have to connect them to the sewers or the?
So the goal
waterways?
is to actually get these environments where they're healthy to live in and they're sustainable. So the power source, the water source, and the sewage source can be sustainable. That makes sense?
So it's not critical to the existing critical infrastructure, or like, are we going to be, is it like a separate, because at some point this is all going to come together and it's going to be relying on the systems that we already have. So
well, the real value of this, go ahead.
No, you go.
The real value of these is not necessarily the homes themselves, but the uniqueness is how they're built and how they're assembled to rebuild some of these places that have been burnt. Because the way that they attach to the ground is different. The way that you go through the provisioning is different. The way, for instance, no wood or no infrastructure is actually touching the ground. And so you can literally build these in a couple weeks with the right types of planning structure. But the real benefit and value is not just what a Clear Home can do, but it's how the ownership and subscriptions and payment and reputation is actually realized. That is the real value. For instance, in the opposite systems within centralized systems, You have to be XYZ in credit, ABC in income ratio, and you never actually own it. But in these environments, the goal is to use a decentralized digital system that actually builds reputation for the individual and can have the individual actually subscribing to owning, so it changes the paradigm. So, you know, just like the credit facilities, for instance, we have people from probably 5 different countries on this call, and the way that they actually have a reputation is all different, even though they might be based upon the same heuristics. So, you know, what's your cash flow? What's your income? What's your debt? What do you pay your bills? You know, what kind of history do you have? How many open lines do you have? But imagine a system where an individual or an organization or an actual asset can actually build its own reputation based upon usage, so the rest of the world can actually let them live. And letting them live means, you know, where do we live? How do we live? How do we travel? How do we identify? And all of those things should tie around the individual in the center of it instead of the opposite. You know, kind of like what we talked about with Mr. Dick earlier. Did that answer your question, or is it totally off base?
You know, I understand that. It's fine. Yeah, I understand.
Any other topics before we wrap up today? By the time we come,
Michael,
go ahead.
I have my hand up.
Go ahead, buddy. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, we don't pay attention. Go for it.
Yeah, I came late to the meeting today. Very sorry. Is there like a written synopsis or like anything that you have like that, materials that I could get to like kind of recap what you guys all talked about earlier?
Yeah, so it's on any of the channels, so X or Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, etc.
Okay.
But and you can just jump around as you want to, and you can provide feedback and use it. But it's basically a 30-minute report out on prior things that occurred, and then any of the open topics, and then just general Q&A on what's going on and feedback on anything. So.
Okay, yeah, because I know you have a huge ecosystem. Like I didn't know about this secure meeting thing with Clear until like I saw you send me the link. So yeah, I'm very impressed and happy to see this thing. So I'll try to get more of our friends in Hawaii to be starting to use it.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything.
You're welcome to use the tech, and you're welcome to join anytime. And we're just grateful for those that are actually paying attention to helping to build a better future, and specifically for what you do in trying to uncover truth and honesty, and you know, and journalism and driving awareness. And it's nice to have some platforms out that people can actually communicate on. And this is just one that we've done for many years. Every week, it's a what we call a cadence. So it's a general cadence of a town hall where people can just collaborate, ask questions. You know, because getting their head around a digital world and ecosystem can be difficult if it's new. A lot of it is vocabulary, as you know, but just like we're connecting right now, you know, what governs this, you know, and the world's getting very small, especially when it comes to different races and different creeds or different currencies or different nations. We're one world, and the sooner that we figure out this one world is, we're all on the same earth, and we're actually all family one way or the other. And when we turn things into love and respect and kindness versus some of the other things that are happening in society, and naturally to try and control in others, but it's, I believe that technology can set us free. So that slavery thing that you mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be a reality, and there can be a choice. You know, right now it's very difficult because a lot of these centralized cultures or systems or secret combinations, they've taken over governments, so they've got unlimited monetary systems and budgets. Like you look at what's going on in Maui, they're throwing some crazy big numbers around, and all you see is everyone getting padded, all their pockets that are on the centralized system. So it's like, why wouldn't they do it? But when there'll be a day when people start understanding, oh, the lights are turning on and we're not dancing with what we thought we were dancing with. And, you know, we can't jump out of this boiling water, so to speak. So anyways, Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time, your attention. We'll plan on seeing you next week. We'll be through the inauguration, so we'll see where that ends up and go from there. So much love, everybody. We'll talk to you later.